Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Hamry. I'm the president here at CSIS, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity where we can present to you a very important member of Congress, Representative Michael. Not all members of Congress, matter of fact, very few are national leaders. Most of them are representatives. But Congressman McCaul is a national leader. He devotes so much of his time to things that are much bigger than just the 10th District of Texas. And he recently traveled to Ukraine. He is the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, an important voice and always a strong voice for us. And he's agreed to share his insights this afternoon. My colleague, Dr. Eliot Cohen, is going to lead the conversation with Representative McCaul, but I wanted to be here to greet him and say thank you for what you're doing. Mr. Chairman, what you've been doing in helping keep the consciousness of Americans focused on this remarkable tragedy and this pivotal moment of what's going on in Ukraine with the aggression from Russia. So let me say thank you to you. I'm grateful that you've given us the opportunity. I think probably we'll turn to you for some initial remarks, and then my colleague Eliot will take it from there. Thank you, sir.
No, and thank you, John. That really meant a lot to me when you said, a national leader, because I represent a district, but I kind of like a parliamentary government, also try to represent views on the national stage as it comes to foreign policy and national security. And CSIS has always been an important partner for me, going back to when we wrote that great report on cybersecurity many years ago, when a lot of people didn't even know what that was. And it was a great educational piece and had a lot of bandwidth to it. And I always enjoy working with your great organization. Let me just say that the events unfolding currently, I don't think we've seen anything like this since my father's generation, and that was World War II. The largest invasion in Europe since World War II. When I was at the Ukrainian border, seeing the hundreds of thousands of refugees, now at 2.5 million in just 2 weeks. It was the parallels, and it was eerie, the parallels to when Hitler invaded Poland. And I think we're dealing with a similar type of monster, and that would be Mr. Putin. I think the parallels to the two of them. And then to go beyond that, what is with President Xi and the unholy alliance I see between President Xi now and Putin, and the threats to Taiwan are reminiscent of the Emperor Hirohito and his expansion into the South Pacific. I've been praising the administration and a critic at the same time, and I'll keep this short, but where I do praise and give them credit is how they've unified the world. But I would argue that Putin has unified the world against him. NATO has never been more unified. They were on life support. Now they're a relevant organization again, and they're all increasing their defense spending, realizing that this is in their backyard and they have a responsibility to deal with this. And also the UN Security Council resolution vote, 141 nations against 5 was very impressive to demonstrate to Putin that he is surrounded, and he doesn't have very many friends, in this fight. Where I have been critical is I thought we could have had more deterrence earlier on. As far back as last November, we had a weapons sale package, and in my position, I sign off on those. That was held up for many months. And it wasn't until just right before the invasion that we transferred these weapons, lethal weapons. And now we're in the post-invasion world, and we're trying to catch up. But the problem is that the clock's running out. Ukrainian people have really demonstrate to the world an inspiration of resistance to a dictator and an oppressor, an inspiration to everyone. In fact, we'll hear from President Zelensky tomorrow in a joint session of Congress virtually, which doesn't happen very often. And I know that will be a very strong performance, on his part. I think we're all the people of Ukraine now. I mean, we're completely supportive of their mission, and we're unified, I think, both as Republicans, and Democrats. So, John, with that, I'll as we say, the Congress yield back, but I appreciate the invitation, and really thanks again for your kind words.
Well, Congressman McCaul, let me join Dr. Hamre in welcoming you to CSIS and expressing gratitude for giving us time in a busy schedule. And I also want to say that I think you're framing this event in the right way. This is a watershed event of a kind that we really haven't experienced, certainly since the fall of the Soviet Union. Let me begin with your recent trip, if I might. I think we all know from our own experiences that there's a difference between seeing things firsthand and what you follow. And I know you've been following the Ukraine situation very closely all along, but I am curious, on this latest visit, were there insights, impressions that you had which really resulted from seeing things up close?
I think the takeaway for me, it was just very chilling. You could put this in black and white video and it would look like 1939. But what was even more, in terms of from a humanitarian standpoint, the fact that the males, the fathers, the husbands, are required by law, if they're 18 to 60 years old, to stay back to fight the war. And so what we saw coming in were the mothers and the children that were stripped from their fathers and husbands, maybe for the last time in their lives. They may never see each other again, and that's very very I don't know, it's emotional. And Poland can't absorb this number, and it'll probably reach the number of 10 million when all is said and done. And I think our European allies, I think the United States, we need to stand up and help with this humanitarian refugee crisis. The second thing that really stood out, we met with the Secretary Blinken. We met with the foreign prime minister, or foreign minister, I should say, of Poland while we were there. Really, most interestingly, we went to the 82nd Airborne to witness firsthand their heroic operations. And it's a multilateral, multinational unit there of Americans, NATO allies, Polish, a lot of Polish soldiers. We sat in for General Donahue's daily briefing on the latest situation with the Russians and what they're doing in Ukraine. And then we had a very highly classified briefing on the weapons transfers that are taking place from an undisclosed location into Ukraine itself. The reason why I mentioned I wish this had been done a little bit earlier is because we know that Russian intelligence is onto this and the location. As you know, in the press accounts recently, last Sunday, a former NATO facility in Ukraine was taken out by Russian missiles. I anticipate that these supply lines that we have going from Poland into Ukraine and other countries for these weapons transfers will be compromised, in the near future, if not already, by the bombing that's going to take place as they encircle Kyiv and this ring of steel. They call it the tanks, and then they will unfortunately probably demolish the city itself. But it's very important that we keep this up, because at the end of the day, and I'll close with this, I think the strength of the Ukrainian people, the morale of the Ukrainian people is far stronger than the morale of the Russian soldier, who probably doesn't even know what they're fighting against, why they're there, and certainly don't want to be engaged in killing innocent women and children. But that's what it's really come to.
Are we doing enough?
I think when I was there, the Mig transfer was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be pilots going into Poland and flying them back across the border. I think symbolically, and I've heard the arguments why that's not going to make a difference, but I think if Zelensky's asking for this, it's a symbolic gesture that from a morale standpoint would be hugely significant, even maybe more so than the MiGs themselves. What we need to do more of, we've been sending Stingers, which are, those are anti-aircraft, but only to like the helicopter level, Javelins, which are anti-tank, and a lot of munitions. Where we are behind the curve, I would say, are these the lethal sort of air defense systems, and that would be the drones, the lethal drones, and the S-300s that are Russian anti-aircraft. They need a lot more of those. We have been, I've been in a lot of classified briefings. We are reaching out to our coalition and our allies to get more of these weapons in there. I wish we had done it sooner. And I will say Turkey has really stepped up to the plate with their lethal drone, which has proved to be very effective. I had dinner with the ambassador, with the chairman, and we persuaded him to convey to Erdogan to send more of these drones in country. And I'm pleased to say that they have done that.
So, I mean, this is obviously a coalition effort. When you add up all of the different efforts that we make, that the Poles make, Lithuanians, Estonians, Turks, is there enough military aid going to the Ukrainians other than things like the S-300s and so on? Is it? Let me put it this way: is it on the right scale, and is it with the right amount of urgency?
Well, I can tell you that I witnessed firsthand the Stingers and Javelins and munitions. I think on that front we're doing quite well. Where the deficit is, and while we're having to play catch up, where we could have been doing this prior to the invasion, which is, I think, it was a big mistake that I've been urging the administration back in November to do. I think the deficit is what I was talking about in terms of air defense systems, and that, it was a Russian Air Force, plane that took out this maternity hospital, and we saw the horrific images of pregnant women being wheeled out, in blood, saying, "Please save my baby." It's these lethal drones and the S-300s, I think, that could be extremely effective against these Russian aircraft, and it's going to be even more so as I hope it's not final days. Because I think at the end of the day, the Russians cannot occupy this space with this many people successfully under a resistance movement or an insurgency. And so it's going to be incumbent upon the free world to continue to supply this weaponry to them. They have the will to fight. And they would tell me, we don't want your troops. We don't need that, but we need your weapons. And they have been calling upon this for months. I'm pleased we're finally doing this. We could have been doing it sooner. But I think that's the missing ingredient, if you will, these lethal, drones and S-300s and things that can knock planes out of the skies.
So, you obviously get a lot of the most highly classified briefings on what's going on. In the unclassified world, there's something of a debate between people who are saying, well, the Russians have sort of slowed down. Yes, it's a lot more difficult, lots of attacks on logistics, higher casualties than they expected, but they're still basically intact and just kind of very slowly moving along. There's a different view, which has been expressed by people like General Ben Hodges, for example, that actually the Russians are in much worse shape than we think, and that it's not just that they could be stalemated, that they really, you could even see in some areas, collapse. I'm curious, between those two poles, where would you stand?
I hate to sound like a diplomat, but I will be on this one. I think it's both. I think that there's been a bit of incompetency on the part of the Russians that we were surprised by. Remember, we were briefed this would be over in 3 to 4 days, and so was Putin. And I think he got very angry when he saw that he was misled in this effort, and that now they're at a snail's pace. I would call it a slow grind is where they are. But, the convoy, the tanks getting stuck in the mud, which is why they were sitting there vulnerable for that 40-mile space for, weeks. And it was a very vulnerable target that I wish we could have taken out at that time. And I urged the administration to get more lethal assistance to do just that. So they couldn't circle around the city. But now they're on their way in the woods, and they're going to circle Kyiv. But, I think so there's a little bit of the incompetence. I think we overestimated the Russian military, and I think Putin did as well. And I think we underestimated the Ukrainian people's will to fight and the resistance itself. That's why I do think the Ukrainians can't. They will not be able to completely stop the Russian front from taking over. It would be very difficult, I think, for them to do that. But I think urban warfare is very difficult. And the Ukrainians have a lot of equipment in there on a defensive posture. A lot of people say, why haven't we seen them take out the convoy? I think they've been keeping what they have right now in the hopes that in Kyiv, so that when they do get circled, they will unleash everything they have. And they put in Ukraine to the Russian, or in Russian, in Kyiv, welcome to hell to the Russians. And I think they're going to give them hell. They're going to give them everything they have and all the weapons we've given them. And you're going to see quite a fight take place. Guerrilla warfare is the worst and the hardest. And Putin's going to bomb it, and he's going to level that beautiful city I've been to so many times. It's going to be really hard to watch. Just like it's hard for the American people to watch this with one hand tied behind our backs. It's like watching a bully on the playground beating up the little kid, and everybody's standing around watching it, and they want to stop it. But I think the Ukrainians are going to put up a fight that we will all be inspired by. And again, in my final analysis, long term, it is not sustainable. It is nearly impossible. Putin's already got 100% of what he's gotten there. And I think another key point, Eliot, is now he's turning to China for more weapons. That means he's running out. Yeah. And he's already put 100% of what he has in this one country. And now he's having to turn to China for weapons. I think that speaks volumes about the state of play in this war.
Yeah. You mentioned that the American people find it hard to see this happening, and you compared it to watching a bully on a playground beat up a small kid. So really, one question that follows from that. What is your basic judgment about, do the American people understand what's at stake here? Now, obviously, you see the news, you can't help but say this is terrible, but Aleppo is terrible too. This, I think we agree, this is something even bigger than that, although the human misery may be similar. Do your constituents, do you feel, really understand what is at stake about what kind of world we're going to have, depending on how this thing goes?
I just spoke at a Syrian event on the 11th anniversary of Assad and his war crime atrocities, and the parallels are very similar. But to answer your question, I would say a month ago, my constituents were asking the question, why is Ukraine important? And I would have to demonstrate to them why it was important. And it had to be more than freedom and democracy. I have to be honest. I would think that would be enough. But I had to also talk about his strategy to close off the Black Sea, Nord Stream 2, that this was also about Putin's attempt to dominate in the energy space, that it also had an impact on President Xi Jinping and his desire to invade Taiwan. Also had to talk about the Ayatollah in Iran as we were negotiating with the Iranians. That there's an interconnection there. Yeah. And it's no coincidence. They all feel emboldened right now and empowered. And I would go back to Afghanistan. I think Putin's always wanted to invade Ukraine, always wanted to take back the breadbasket to, the mother country, just like Xi feels like he deserves Taiwan. They're part of Imperial China. And I think with Afghanistan, they saw a weakness. And we know from Chamberlain, Hitler, what happened and what Churchill stood for against appeasement, Reagan, peace through strength. These are historical axioms that are true. And I think they saw a moment of weakness and made the calculation to take advantage of that. I'm hoping this miscalculation by Putin, though, will be seen by President Xi as something that he doesn't want for his country.
Yeah. Of course, that'll partly depend on what we do. I guess in that.
Oh, and Eliot, if I could just to further expand on your question, the American people have changed their perception. And I think it's because of the social media. I think it's because when you turn on the TV, all you see are these war crimes and the atrocities and the maternity hospital getting bombed. And, you cannot look at those images and not feel compelled to do something about it. And so I think that's really galvanized. There are still pockets of, people in our, in America that are isolationists. But I think for the most part, when I have to explain why is Ukraine relevant or important, I think they understand that now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, let me just pursue a little bit further that bully in the playground. Usually what you'd hope would be that your kid would step in and stop it. So let me turn that into a question. Are there circumstances in which you would favor use of American military power?
Is my volume on?
There we go.
Eliot, I think to answer your question, we need, I think it's important, and these are discussions I've had internally with the administration. I was with the UK ambassador, her residence with the UK foreign minister and Secretary Blinken, but we need to start thinking about what are the red lines here. And I think that's going to be the big debate. I think the no-fly zone, for obvious reasons, is shown, and I know Zelensky's going to ask for that, but that would put Russian aircrafts in direct conflict with NATO and would trigger Article 5 very quickly. That's why we want to arm them. That's why I was in favor of the MiGs. But I think we have to have this discussion about red lines. Are we going to sit back and allow him to drop? And we know with this false flag operation on the Ukrainian biolabs, he's laying the predicate for chemical weapons, just like he did in Syria. And is the world going to stand back and allow that to happen? Using weapons of mass destruction in violation of the Geneva Convention as a war criminal, how long are we going to sit back and do nothing? I know there were red lines in the Obama administration when they were crossed, didn't do anything. The previous administration struck Syria. I think the equation here is a little different because you're dealing with two major world powers that could put this on the scale of a World War III. And so we don't want a miscalculation or an escalation that'll put us in a world war, but certainly a red line with respect to chemical weapons. And I would say also these short-range tactical nukes that Putin, Russia has many more of them than we do. If he gets pushed into a corner like a scorpion and he's in a desperate situation, he could very well sting with a short-range tactical nuke, which would really wake up the eyes of the world. I can't see the world just standing back and allowing that to happen without further involvement.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've indicated that either chemical weapons or nuclear weapons of any kind would be a red line. Should we be thinking about any other kind of red line?
I think the crimes against humanity, the war crimes, I think that there will be a miscalculation that will eventually trigger something. Like, for instance, when the Russians fired those missiles at the bases on the border of Poland and Ukraine, you can't really see that border really well from the air. What if there's a miscalculation when those missiles landed in Poland?
Right.
What if the prime ministers, you get the prime ministers of Poland and Slovakia and Romania going into Kyiv to meet with Zelensky. What if they are bombed and assassinated like Archduke Ferdinand? There are a lot of scenarios that could trigger this, but two of the easiest, clearer red lines, in my judgment, would be any attack by a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I mean, my sense is that those are discussions that we're going to be having more and more as this thing.
I think, unfortunately, you're correct on that.
As this thing unrolls. If, I guess one other way of thinking about this is you mentioned possibility of the Russians accidentally or maybe even deliberately throwing a missile or two at one of our bases in Poland from which we're transshipping. Now, I would assume that the Poles would invoke Article 5. That's, it's not entirely automatic that everybody else signs up. First, how do you think the rest of NATO would react? And, what concretely are the kinds of things that we should think about doing? I mean, I'll give you a scenario. The Russians hit a base in probably maybe a similar way to the one that they hit that was 15 miles into Ukraine, similar level of casualties and destruction. The Poles say this is an attack. We want to invoke Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. An attack against one is an attack against all. How should we think about that scenario?
Man, that's an excellent question, Eliot. I think there's one line of thought that a proportionate response would be adequate, and that would be to immediately take out the source of where that came from. Now, if it comes from Russia, that's a whole different equation. But if it came out of Ukraine to attack the Russians, that would be one. I think if Poland did invoke Article 5, because I've never seen NATO more unified, I think they would be hard-pressed not to support Poland's request. Article 5 would be triggered. Now, if it's triggered, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to war against them. There are various levels to that. But my sense is that Poland would ask for a request for Article 5 nations to respond to go to war with Russia. With respect to the target in Poland, that would be our 82nd Airborne. It is a high-value target. They are hardening it with Patriot batteries. They have a very good anti-missile, anti-aircraft capability. So I think that scenario would be hopefully not likely, but the Russian intelligence are onto all this.
Yeah. Do you see any potential for the conflict to spread horizontally, as it were? Say, Belarus gets engaged. I know it looks like Lukashenko is trying to prevent that from happening because he can't really trust his own military. But people have also talked about the Russians trying something in the Suwalki Gap, pushing towards Lithuania, maybe trying to pick a fight with the Estonians over Narva. Do you see any of that, or do you think they just have their hands full in Ukraine?
Well, initially we war gamed this out, and a lot of people thought, well, we'll just go to the Donbass and call it a day and have a victory parade. He may have gotten away with that. But we saw the alignment of the cavalry, if you will, 160 miles north of Kyiv. Then it became very clear or disturbing that he was going to go for broke, and that means descending into Kyiv, which is exactly what he's doing. And then some thought, well, because Mariupol's in the Donbass region, he would just call the Donbass, extending the two states that the Duma said were legitimate states independent from Ukraine, and then call it a day. But he went far beyond that. I personally thought he would go for all of it, and it's exactly what he's doing in Odessa. A very important strategic port for him to take. And that gives him, with Crimea and Mariupol, complete dominance in the Black Sea, cutting off Ukraine from the Black Sea and giving him energy dominance as well. The two most vulnerable that I see are the non-NATO allies in the region, and that would be Moldova and Georgia. They've already taken 20% of Georgia. And Moldova, as you know, they have a presence there. As well. So those would be the two, I think, in the short term, most pressing. I do think he's bitten off more than he could chew right now. and he's got more on his plate dealing with just Ukraine. So in the scenario this took 3 to 4 days, that expansion to Moldova and Georgia could have been, or the Baltic nations and states, could have been more, I think, appealing to him. But this obviously has not gone well for Mr. Putin.
Yeah. Let me shift a little bit domestically. Like a lot of people, I've been somewhat dismayed about the nature of our domestic politics. But I have to say, one thing that's very striking is the degree of bipartisanship, or so it looks, particularly in Congress, on this issue. And am I right to feel good about that? And what does it portend for the future, do you think?
I think when you have something of this magnitude, partisan politics should take a back seat. We need to do what's best for the world, what's best for Americans, but also our allies and, our democracies. And it's a fight for freedom and democracy against those who oppress it. And there's no stronger fight if you go back to World War II and the Cold War. That's really what it's been all about. And, we took this bipartisan delegation to Poland. We saw the refugees, and we all kind of felt not only great sorrow, but great anger that one man could do this to an entire population. Yeah. And that has a solidarity effect. We had a very diverse politically on the spectrum, very diverse membership. But we all came back united that we need to do more to help Ukraine. And even Chairman Meeks, who's not prone to wanting to, to do an AUMF or to put weapons in a country, came back completely converted to the idea we need to stand together and do everything we can to help these people. And I think that was a unifying. I think what you're going to see tomorrow morning with the joint session of Congress and Zelensky is going to have a very unifying impact on Congress and therefore the American people in support of Ukraine. And that will send a very strong message to Putin that he's on the losing edge of this. Remember, he wants his legacy to be known as the great Tsar or Stalin or whatever he wants to be known as that brought the empire back. But his legacy, I think, will be that of a war criminal. And the more he gets boxed in with the whole world against him, knowing that his legacy is going to be going down as one of the most ruthless dictators since Hitler, that's going to have a profound impact on his psyche, which I think is very unstable right now.
So we have only a couple of minutes left. Let me just ask you one last question, and feel free to expand on it. And I'm just curious, how do you see this playing out? I mean, do you think this war will be rolling on for years? Do you think months? Do you think it ends with occupation, but then guerrilla war? I mean, what are the scenarios that, maybe not a single scenario, but what are the scenarios that you think are most likely?
Well, at the end of the day, it's not going to end well for Putin. And I hope the Russian people will oust him and join, the rest of the world. But, I don't know if that will happen or not. I certainly hope it does. But with respect to the battlefield, I think the Russian forces will overpower, but the Ukrainians are going to put up a very, very hard fight, and they're going to have a lot of body bags going back to Russia. And the Russian people are going to see this. And the more we can get into Russia from a social media standpoint, so they know the truth, the more of an uprising we can see within Russia itself and Mr. Putin. It could very well turn into an insurgency resistance war where we continue to funnel weapons. And that's, again, where the morale of the Ukrainians is far superior to the Russians. And I think eventually they're going to give out. I don't know how long that will be. I don't have that kind of crystal ball. General Donahue thinks we wear down the strength of the Russians. We wear them down to get to a point to get back to the negotiating table. I think the question, though, Eliot, is what is the off-ramp? What is the golden bridge, they call it? What's the off-ramp here? I mean, and would Zelensky be willing to give him anything after what he's done to his own people? I will leave that to President Zelensky. That's his decision to make. But we tried diplomacy. We tried everything, and we still are. But they are not. They want to break the will of the Ukrainian people right now, and so the off ramp is very hard to see right now. Other than, at the end of the day, Eliot, I think they're going to have another Afghanistan on their hands, just like they did against the Mujahideen, and we know how that turned out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the first few weeks, they've already taken casualties, which are, like half of what they took during the entire Afghan war. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let me just ask if there are any other thoughts you want to leave us with, and then I'll just thank you and wrap this up.
Well, I think America's at its best when we put our partisan politics aside and we stand as Americans in what has become probably one of the greatest conflicts in our lifetime. As General Donahue said, not since World War II have we seen anything like this. We've had a lot of little wars, but we haven't had a great power conflict like this. This is a great power conflict, and the stakes can never be higher, and time is of the essence. And that's why we appropriate so much money for humanitarian, but also lethal military assistance to go into Ukraine. And I've had many conversations with them to move this as quickly as possible. And we do stand together in Congress and hopefully as a nation, in support of what Ukraine stands for. If we can't stand for liberty and freedom and democracy, then what are we worth as a nation? That's what we were founded upon. So I think the fight has never been more justified, nor more relevant, nor more important in our lifetime.
Well, eloquently put. Let me again thank you for joining us, and above all, thank you for your leadership at a really critical moment for our country and for the world. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Eliot and John, and thanks to CSIS.